Blizzard Entertainment presents The Doom of Karesh by Adam Christopher, prequel to World of Warcraft, The War Within, narrated by Ray Porter. Chapter 3, Ethereum. The years that followed were terrible and dark, both in the hearts of the Kareshi and for Karesh itself. For while the barriers held, and held firm, their dim arcane brilliance and strange warmth were now the only thing that kept our world alive. The twin sons of Karesh, Meter and Time-Eater, would never again cast their light upon this land nor any other. They had been taken, eaten, consumed by Dimensius in his insatiable hunger. Karesh itself was now alone, trapped in the void, a prisoner of its terrible lord. There was, though, something still shining bright within our people, even if our future remained dark as the skies above. We had hope. Hope in ourselves and in the Council of Oracles, and the Ravel had hope in me. The void beyond our barriers raged as though a living beast, but the Kareshi found another kind of strength. Not content to spectate, they fought back. All aspects, the untamed, the exchange, the testing, the architect, united as never before, battling against the unknowable void with spell and incantation, machine and ingenious device. The void was a shapeless and fearful horror, but the Kareshi spirit was fierce and undying, something Dimensius, the Void Lord, could not anticipate. And so the barriers held, and what started as war soon morphed into siege. Yes, we were protected. Yes, life went on as best it could. But how long would we last? Because the truth was that the very protection we now relied upon came with a terrible cost. Those magical barriers of arcane might had saved our cities, but they were flaying our people alive. It was called many things at first, but soon all came to know it as simply the wasting. I had seen the signs early, and I can only curse my hubris for not taking action sooner. As the barriers were built, so those who worked upon them began to wither and weaken, their skin peeling away, scorched to ash like in a great fire. Perhaps my work, my calculations, should have been questioned by myself, by Nari, who was ever present at my side, by the Ravel, who looked to me for leadership and guidance. Perhaps if they saw what I saw, knew what I knew, and suspected what I hid from them, I would have found a solution. The facts were simple. The vast domes may have appeared solid, but their power was in a state of constant flux, demanding a flow of magic so great it was almost beyond comprehension. My calculations, although terrifying, were correct, and were judged to be an acceptable cost to maintain the barriers over a short period of siege. But Dimensius had a patience measured not in months or years, but in eternities. The longer the siege went on, the more terrible the fate of the Kareshi became. I consulted with technomancers and mages to find an answer, but as the sheer scale of the problem became more apparent, they began to cloister themselves. They buried their heads, not in my data, but in crumbling tomes lifted from ancient crypts, in spells and magics from other times and places, as they turned to superstition and ritual to find the answer I could not give them. The wasting soon spread, away from the laborers who had the closest contact with the arcane, to the people of the cities themselves. Bodies burned, twisted, shriveled, the flesh charred with no heat as the unending flux of the barriers beat down on the people with the power of too many suns. All the Kareshi, from the oracles to the nomads of the wastelands, began wrapping their disintegrating forms in layered bindings. In time, the barriers protected city-states populated by faceless, featureless beings. The Kareshi were strong, but not that strong. This was a test like no other, and I feared the wasting would prove our undoing. The society, so carefully governed by the Council of Oracles, began unraveling like the bindings that now held our bodies together. Those whispers of dissent arose once more, but now with a violence previously unseen among the city-states of our world. First, the wasting, and then chaos. Some who fought the void lashed their magics against their own kind. Parts of Tazavesh and Manusa, abandoned to the arcane reactors and the conduits that fed them, became battlegrounds, and I watched with sorrow as we descended into a sort of madness. The oracles, for their part, did exercise a firm hand. It was thanks to them and the Kareshi's deep commitment to their oaths that true anarchy was avoided. But even on peaceful days, there was a tension in the air that could be unbearable. But perhaps it did not matter, for I had made other errors in my calculations. The truth was the Rishi ribbons were perfect in their ability to transmute any and all energies, including those of the void. So while they powered the barriers, channeling energy between the network of arcane reactors that now covered Karesh, their very nature meant the process was, of its own volition, happening in reverse as well. Such was the power of the void that every attack by Dimensius fed the reactors themselves, the energy absorbed by the barriers and transmuted by the Rishi ribbons through no design of my own. At first I was overjoyed. Then my elation turned to despair as I realized the fate I had doomed my people to. To be exposed to ever-increasing arcane energy over so many, many years. It was this that was the true cause of the wasting. The barriers would survive. Those trapped beneath them would not. Even if Dimensius were one day able to penetrate our defenses, the world he consumed would be a dead one. I am afraid. Chryson lay upon the bed, her face turned away from me. I knelt beside her on the floor, a fresh spool of bandages ready by my side, the shears I used to cut the old bindings away from her body poised over her back. For a moment I remembered the skin beneath those bindings, remembered the feel of it under my fingers, the softness and the warmth, and I wondered if I would ever feel it again. My love? Chryson adjusted to face me. I looked at her eyes, two glittering jewels shining between the thin slit of her bindings. Her eyes were all I could see of her then, and mine were all she could see of me. Her words surprised me. Oh, she had spoken before of her fears, as had I, but there was another meaning now. something I felt, too. Chryson feared not for herself, nor even for me, but for the fate of Karesh and the Kareshi. The thought that all of what we had done was for nothing, that the barriers that had taken so much work had merely prolonged the inevitable, provided another agony. They had condemned our people to a living death, destroying them body and mind before Dimensius came to consume us anyway. Chryson glanced away again. I resumed the task of changing her bandages. I cut the first binding, and Chryson sighed. The bandages were a requirement, but even after all this time, none among my people had grown accustomed to wearing them.
"If we die," said Chryson, "at least we die together."
I kept cutting.
"And at least we die fighting,"
she continued.
"You have served Karesh well, my love. The barriers have worked."
I stifled a laugh, and surprised at my own reaction, I paused in my work. I have protected the Kareshi only for us to fight among ourselves, to die beneath the source of our protection. And in the end, the inevitable is but delayed. All of what we have done, I sometimes wonder why we did it.
We did it for us.
Chryson turned on the bed and reached out with a bandaged hand to take my own and squeeze.
We die as Kareshi, not as some terrible corruption of the void. That, my love, is perpetual torment. You have saved us from that fate, and for that and many other reasons, I have long loved you.
I heard something in my mind then. Not the voice, that I had not heard in many a month. This was a simple sound, a single note. No, a single thought, drowning out all others, ringing like a bell in my mind. I was fixed to the spot, unmoving, my eyes no longer on hers, but on her back, where the last layer of binding had been revealed. The cloth should have been dark, stained by the decay of the flesh beneath, but instead there was... I could scarcely believe it. Chryson moved to rise, but I motioned for her to stay where she was. I let go of her hand and she called out in surprise, but I was on my feet at once. I doused the lantern, plunging the bedchamber into sudden darkness. No, the room was not dark. There was a light, and it shone from Chryson herself, pale, faint, but present. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw the way the light moved under the bandages, not just on the portion I had exposed, but shining through other parts of her body. It was a light I knew. It was a light all the Kareshi had learned about over these last terrible years. It was the light of the arcane barriers. Chryson's wounds were no longer physical, they were magical. The transmutation powers of the Rishi ribbons had surpassed some threshold, something beyond my calculations yet again.
No longer beings of flesh.
I froze where I stood, the arcane glow from Chryson's body a ripple across the room, across my body.
Something more.
I listened to the voice in my mind, resisting the urge.
Yes, you know it is the answer.
To turn and face a presence I felt suddenly at my shoulder, but
you know it.
Which was not there.
But will your people listen?
For the second time in my life, I knew how to save my people. Salhadar stared at Chryson. I was ashamed to have asked her here, to show us her glowing flesh, to become nothing but an object of scientific curiosity. But she readily agreed to the task, and I was glad she did, for she was the proof that there was a future for the Kareshi, if not for Karesh. Salhadar waited alongside the rest of the rabble. We were a smaller group now. Many of our peers had succumbed to the wasting. Those who remained stood wrapped in their bandages, their robes and clothes of office their only true means of identification. As Salhadar watched, Chryson withdrew her unwrapped back and, as further demonstration, unwound her left arm. Her blackened tendons were crisscrossed with cracks like one of the ancient stone roads her people used to walk, and from those cracks shone the light of the arcane.
You are confident in your calculations.
This was Kaiveza, and she did not say this as a question, but a statement. As always, she and Nari were by my side. I could not see Nari smile, not this time, but I imagined the warm expression was still there, beneath her bindings. I bowed to them, then turned to Salhadar. "The Rishi ribbons are powerful artifacts indeed," I said, "and they have one last secret to unlock." I looked upon the blank, covered faces of my friends. "Do you not see? If we are beings of energy, we will not need this world. We may go wherever we like, anywhere in the great dark beyond. The Rishi ribbons will not only allow us to survive, they will enable us to become something more." Salhadar flinched at my words. He glanced at Bilal, but the two did not speak. While their expressions were unreadable, their body language was as obvious as an open grimoire. I pressed my case. The wasting is unstoppable. It is a byproduct of the barriers, an inevitable end to our people. But what if this was not to be? What if we could live on? Transmutation of energy, transmutation of the Kareshi. I say to you now, it is possible. I held up my hand and tore the bandages from it. The flesh beneath was almost mummified, barely clinging to the brittle bones, but yes, there it was, the glow of the arcane. Fainter than Chryson's, but there nonetheless. We need not be tethered to our physical bodies. With the Rishi ribbons, we can transmute our very beings into ones of energy. We can live on, all of us, and our world too. We can forge a new Karesh and a new future, free of the barriers and beyond the reach of Dimensius. I stopped, and around me the Ravel remained silent. I cursed the bandages we were forced to wear, preventing me from seeing the true reactions of the group. The fact was, I had no more to say. I knew the Rishi ribbons were the means to our salvation, yet I did not know how. In my mind, I felt ashamed, for I knew the precise mechanism would take time to solve, and the patience of my peers had worn thin. Then Nari intervened.
"It is a desperate stratagem," she said. "The final gamble of a dying race."
Salhadar and Bilal stirred, glanced at each other once more.
"But,"
Nari continued,
"it is our only hope. For the Kareshi to survive, we have no choice."
She gestured to me.
"Locus-Walker's efforts have preserved us thus far."
There was muttering at that, whispers. I felt Chryson take my bare hand in hers, and for the first time in so long, I felt her skin against mine. Burned, dry, fragile skin, yes, but for a moment I was lost in happy memories of distant times spent with my love. It was Bilal who interrupted my reverie. Perhaps his word was intended only for Salhadar to hear, but something told me otherwise.
Blasphemy!
Chryson's grip tightened in mine as a shocked gasp echoed around the hall. Salhadar raised his own bandaged hands.
Decorum, please.
He looked to me.
I have much to think on.
He addressed the Ravel now.
Go. I will call you here again for my final decision.
With that, the Ravel parted. It was to be for the final time, but I did not know that then. Word did not come from Salhadar the next day, nor the day after, nor for several beyond. But I did not wait for his decree, a mere formality, I was certain, for I knew my task was urgent, the work ahead difficult, and that time was not our ally. I therefore started at once to gather what Rishi ribbons had not yet been used in the arcane reactors. No sooner had I started than the voice came again.
Yes, Locus-Walker. Gather them now before it is too late.
Not for the first time, I wondered about this voice. Was it real? Or was it merely a facet of my own mind that spoke to me? Because as I collected the Rishi ribbons, the whisper merely told me what I already knew.
The Rishi ribbons are the key to the future. The time of the Karesh's ascendance is at hand.
I could not act alone, and it was to Nari I went for help. Her network of agents was a web that spread across all Karesh, and gathering the Rishi ribbons would take many hands. But it was upon the third day following that Nari returned with troubling news. Her agents had failed in their task. The Rishi ribbons, already gone from their sacred holdings, gathered in number by none other than Salhadar himself. But she was quick to still my excitement. She doubted the high priest was taking fast action in preparation for what was to come. For on her journeys Nari had heard and seen much. There was rumor and intrigue. News whispered that Salhadar called himself high priest no longer, that he intended to make a public address on the morrow. Salhadar was making plans. And those plans, Nari said, did not feature the Ravel in their undertaking. I summoned Kaiveza and Chryson also, for I feared what was to come next and wanted her close. How long our conference lasted, I do not know. But before long, a bell sounded across the city. It came from the market square. And we four went with all haste to find the plaza alive with more bandage-wrapped citizens than I had seen together for some time. The news Nari heard had spread, it seemed, and not for the first time I cursed my dedication to my oath, which often cloistered me from the news of the world. The bell rang a second time, and there was movement on the balcony of the market guild hall. Salhadar appeared, Bilal at his side, but there was another with them I had not seen for a long, long time.
Soul scribe,
muttered Kaiveza into my ear.
Out from hiding at last.
This was true. Since the erection of the barriers, the nomadic peoples of the testing had become more integrated with residents of the city-states, but even Chryson had not seen the soul scribe for many a month. Salhadar spread his arms, and the crowd hushed.
The future of Karesh hangs in the balance,
he said.
I will not lie to you, my people.
We have fought long to protect you. We have worked hard to give you the future you deserve. The all-devouring is a torment without end, and the means of our protection is a suffering we can endure only for so long. The moment had come, and now, despite the voice in my mind, despite the warnings of Nari, I felt my confidence returning. Salhadar was doing precisely as we had suggested. The people needed to know what was to come, because after years of struggle and change, this was to be the greatest challenge of them all. There is change coming, Salhadar continued. Change for all of us. For these last years you have worked hard and followed the path of your oaths. The Council of Oracles has asked much of you, and the strength of the Karesh has endured, even as our bodies wither and our numbers dwindle. We are soon to face the greatest test of all, and for that reason we must unite, cast aside our differences, forget our arguments. We have fortitude, we have resolve, and I commit to you now the new oath I have undertaken. For I am no longer your high priest. I am your high king. I felt my companions grow tense beside me, even as I struggled to comprehend Salhadar's meaning, if not his words. To declare himself High King was not a strategy I had expected or understood. And as your High King, Salhadar said, there are truths I must tell you. At this, he cast his gaze skyward at the pink dome above that protected us from the boiling darkness of the void beyond. The barriers both protect us and condemn us. We are trapped beneath them as the wasting destroys us. He stepped forward on the balcony to look down upon his people. But the wasting was no accident, my people. There were those among us who schemed and plotted, who designed this fate, who sought the doom of the Karesh even as we fought for our very survival. Chryson's grip was tight in mine. I thought of my work. I thought of the preparations we had made, every breath taken to safeguard the future of our people, if not our world itself. I could scarcely believe what Salhadar was now saying. And there, on the balcony above, the newly declared High King was pointing a bandaged hand, pointing it at me. There stands the Locus-Walker, he said. Void sorcerer, arch-traitor, and there his comrades, the leaders of a conspiracy that would gift this world to the Void Lord. They and their friends have met in secret, plotted against us under the guise of saving Karesh. It is they who have undone us, my people. It is they who have deceived us. The wasting was by their design. They have betrayed us all with their blasphemy. And then I felt Chryson's hand pulling on mine. I turned in confusion and, yes, panic, caught in a sea of enemies as the people in the square rounded on us. Take them! This was the Soul Scribe, her voice loud and sharp, filled with anger and hate. Do not let them escape! No sooner had the Soul Scribe cast her order across the crowd than the vast curve of the arcane barrier cracked from horizon to horizon with the sound of 100 thunderclaps. At once, the crowd ducked, covering their bowed heads with raised arms, and then they looked to the sky. All watched in mute horror as the glassy pink flux that protected Tazavesh split again and again and again, as though it were made not of arcane energy, but Tingarla glass. All stared, save for the Soul Scribe and Salhadar, as the fear of the crowd turned to a terrible anger directed at my party. I cast a glance upon the balcony of the guild hall. There I saw it. The real traitors, the real conspirators. The pair whispered close, terror the furthest thing from their minds. And while the barrier crackled and began to fade, the sky restored to the awful purple glow of the void itself. So the crowd's attention returned to those denounced by their High King. We were lucky that Nari was with us, Kaiveza too. Their skills in combat were impressive, and although we were surrounded, it was by untrained citizens. My two fierce friends quickly pushed the rioters aside, allowing the four of us to flee the square intact. Nari led the way, her intimate knowledge of the city and its secrets a boon as we sought sanctuary. My mind roared with noise, and it was all I could do to follow, my hand never leaving Chryson's. But now, the entire city was against us. Every alley and thoroughfare led us to citizens, all angry, some armed, the High King's decree having been heard across the land, the message echoed and amplified by the Council of Oracles. As we ran, I soon realized that I was a liability, slowing down our escape. We stopped in a shadowed corner, and I outlined my plan. Chryson had to be kept safe, and Kaiveza promised to be her guardian. Despite the High King's betrayal, I knew I had work to do, that there still might be a chance, however slight, to use the Rishi ribbons and save the Kareshi. In this task, Nari would protect and aid me. And so, we separated, our farewells hasty, with a promise to meet when it was safe. And then I watched Kaiveza and Chryson as they vanished into an alley. And then I too ran, as all around us the city fell to riot, and the sky darkened, and the void roiled, and what hope I once had vanished, along with the barriers that protected us. On a high plateau of Telegris Rift, Ilaria Windrunner stopped in her tracks.
And?
Locus-Walker turned from surveying the way ahead and drifted back toward his pupil.
You have a question?
I have many,
said Ilaria.
Aren't you going to tell me what happened next?
Locus-Walker paused.
There is little to tell,
he said.
Nari and I succeeded in our task, eventually.
Eventually?
Ilaria sighed.
I must know more than that.
Must you?
Locus-Walker asked.
The Rishi ribbons saved us. Our people were transmuted into beings of energy. Dimensius closed in and Karesh was consumed. There was nothing the Kareshi could do to stop it, but we survived. In a way.
Ilaria felt her jaw slacken in surprise.
And Chryson? What happened to her? And what happened after the High King denounced you? You speak now as though it all meant nothing to you.
Much happened,
said Locus-Walker.
To many people. Of Chryson, I never saw her again. Of Nari and Kaiveza, of Salhadar and the Soul Scribe.
He trailed off. Ilaria looked firmly at him, her hands clasping and unclasping the grip of her bow in frustration.
That is a story for another time,
he said finally.
The Kareshi survived. Some of them anyway.
Alaria shook her head.
They survived, and yet you have abandoned them, isolating yourself. What for? Penance? Shame? Fear? Surely they need you now as they needed you then.
And there,
Said Locus-Walker.
your aim is so very wide of the mark, Archer.
Alaria sighed in frustration.
Your history lesson was perhaps less useful than you think. Did you mean to balance my mind through sheer distraction?
It is your tethers that make you unbalanced, Alaria. Release these things that weigh you down, these people you care about. This is holding you back from becoming who you're meant to be.
The people I care about. Like you did with Chryson? With Kaiveza?
Locus-Walker came closer.
Perhaps you do understand. It was not the story of Karesh that was the lesson, though it was the information you demanded of me. It was the story of Chryson. Through her tale, I had hoped to show you that some paths are meant to fork, that some destinies are not designed to be so entwined, that some futures exist, but they must exist apart. To find your truth, you must see this and you must decide, balancing the good of your people, the good of your kin, against the good of yourself.
Alaria stared at Locus-Walker, trying to untangle his message. There was wisdom there, she knew.
There.
Alaria spun. They were no longer alone on the plateau. They had found the Void Revenant, or rather, the Void Revenant had found them. The creature towered over them, a living, spinning storm of void energy, purple smoke like eddies of dark power rising from its armored shoulders, from which sprouted 6 ragged, blade-like wings. Hunched over, its face hidden by a heavy iron mask that revealed nothing but a gaping maw lined with jagged teeth. Glowing power rimmed its terrible form like a cursed hoarfrost that left spots dancing in Alaria's vision. She blinked them away and, readying herself for battle, felt her heart thud in her chest, in her ears.
No.
The sound. It was not her fear, her reeling thoughts. It was a voice, a whisper, calling out across the infinite distance of the twisting nether. The voice pulled at her, altogether alien and yet at once instantly familiar. Alaria turned away from the creature. She saw Locus-Walker behind her, hovering, motionless, his gaze upon the Revenant. As she watched, he held out a hand toward it, but the gesture was peaceful, almost friendly. Locus-Walker knew something about the Revenant he hadn't told her. It was a creature, he had said, more powerful than the others they had encountered, but the same in nature. Yet, how he knew it was on Telegra's Rift, why it was so important to dispatch, he had never said. The voice called again. In Alaria's mind it sounded like a woman's, although perhaps it was just an echo of her own. But could Locus-Walker hear it too? Was that how he knew the creature was here? And then the voice was gone, and the sudden silence in Alaria's mind rang out like a bell. She glanced at Locus-Walker, saw his outstretched hand curl into a tight fist.
Now,
He said.
the time is now.
Alaria turned slowly, pulling her bowstring back hard. She felt it dig painfully into her bottom lip, felt the way her hand stretched the skin of her face back, baring her teeth. She sighted along the length of the arrow, aiming for the creature's heart, but she did not fire.
Valeria, quickly now,
said Locus-Walker.
Fire before it knows.
Valeria lowered her bow.
I want to know who it is before I kill it.
She expected, perhaps, another lecture, another lesson wrapped in a riddle. Instead, Locus-Walker snarled and flew forward, pushing Valeria to the ground as he launched his attack. Valeria rolled in the dirt and saw the Void Revenant spin and begin to lengthen, the power of the shadow growing inside it as it focused its attention at the oncoming attack. Within moments, it was twice the size it had been, dwarfing Locus-Walker before it. Valeria stood. She sighed, then gritted her teeth, took her aim, and fired her arrow. The battle was short but fierce, and then Valeria and Locus-Walker were alone on the plateau once more, the void energies of the Revenant evaporating like colored smoke back into the twisting nether. All that remained of the creature was its heart, the pulsing core of void energy hovering in the air before them. Valeria slung her bow over her back and reached for the heart, feeling the slight tug of the void on her hand as she went to take it. She knew what she had to do. She had done it before. Locus-Walker had shown her.
Stop.
Valeria dropped her hand.
I thought...
I told you before, this one belongs to me.
Locus-Walker drifted forward as Valeria stepped back. She felt her heart thud in her chest again. She had to know.
This creature,
she whispered.
This Revenant of the Void.
Ask your question.
Valeria reached forward and took the heart in her hand. She squeezed, feeling it buzz uncomfortably, the electric tang of the void as it seemed to surge invisibly around her. The voice called out again. Maybe it was her own voice. Maybe it was an echo of the void. Or maybe it was the echo of someone else entirely.
Do you know who this creature was once?
She asked. Locus-Walker's hand curled once more into a fist.
That belongs to me,
he said.
I know it does,
said Valeria.
It always did, didn't it?
Locus-Walker did not speak.
You are wrong, Locus-Walker,
said Valeria.
My strength, my balance, comes precisely from those I love. They are not a weight that needs to be countered lest I be dragged down. My love for them is not a thing to be purged so I can be pure of mind and sure of focus. My strength comes from them.
She stepped closer to Locus-Walker, holding the void heart in her hand.
That was where your strength once came from, too. You told me the story of two loves on a dying world, and I felt that love across the ages. You claim to teach me, but it is you who have forgotten the lesson. It is true that the future has many paths, and there is another open to me now. A path I fear you never saw back then.
Valeria opened her hand. The void heart floated in the air, glowing with an impossible halo of violet, and drifted slowly toward Locus-Walker.
Or perhaps you flinched away from it,
said Valeria.
I do not know. It was not my story to tell.
With that, she spun on her heel.
I must return to Dalaran. Khadgar awaits my report.
She looked over her shoulder.
Perhaps now you will think about the lesson I have given you.
She walked off across the barren plateau as the void flashed above her, and Locus-Walker was alone with his thoughts, alone with his past. Before him, the void heart floated. A long moment passed before Locus-Walker reached out and took the void heart. He paused only for the span of a breath, and then he consumed it, and it was gone. And with it, the memory of a love from another time.